And welcome to today's COVID-19 update. I'll now ask Professor Spurrier to give us today's update.
Thank you, Minister, and good afternoon. We do have some more news here in South Australia, and we do have some more cases, unfortunately. 3 new cases today. Now, one of those cases is somebody who was an international traveller and is in a medi-hotel, and that's somebody in their 30s, so obviously that's nothing to be concerned about. One is also somebody that we have talked about, or I talked about earlier this morning on radio, and this is a man in his 40s, and this is the co-driver of the positive truck driver. And so it's not surprising if somebody is in a cab together that they become positive, but that's being officially reported today. And just to mention, on the basis of that, we did change some of the tiers, the ratings of our exposure sites. And just in addition to that, and this was put out as a late media release last night, as we got more information about these gentlemen, we found out that they'd had that the original case had had a previous truck visit through South Australia, had driven through South Australia, and because we had results from Victoria and our result in South Australia, we could see the way the result was tracking, and it was very clear he was at the end of his infectious period. That meant that when he was back in our state on the 30th of September, right at the end of September, he would have been infectious, and therefore we've got a couple of other exposure sites that we've had to list in Renmark. So I'm particularly interested in making sure we've got everybody tested, because that's now some time ago, and there would only be another 4 days for that 14-day quarantine from that date. But you can see when we have freight drivers, they don't just come in once, but often they have had multiple trips, and it certainly was a lot of work for my team to piece all of that information together. So that's now up on our website. Now, we have another problem today, though, in South Australia. We have a 3rd case, and this is a woman in her 30s, and she's one of the fly-in, fly-out miners who works as an essential worker in our state, and she's come from Victoria. She arrived in Adelaide through the Adelaide Airport from Melbourne around 6 p.m. last night, and that was on the flight JQ778. And so she tested at the airport, and people know there's good testing at our airport, very quick turnaround time, and we had a positive result back this morning. And we do get an indication when we look at the result at how infectious somebody is, and this person is clearly very infectious. Now, because this is a mine worker or an essential worker, they get a classification in our cross-border direction of a level 4, and so the mine requires them to quarantine, self-quarantine in Adelaide before going to the mine site. So this person went to a hotel, and she went to the Quest Hotel on King William Street, and that had been the nominated quarantine site for this particular mine. So because she hadn't been in a medi-hotel, there was the transfer to the Quest, and so unfortunately we have got a taxi driver who we've contacted this morning that will be required to quarantine, and then there's also the front of house person at the Quest hotel that is going to need to quarantine. So very recent information my team is working through at the moment. We'll be looking at CCTV footage and making a determination about any other close contacts. But despite the fact that she is, as I said, really quite infectious, she's only been in our state for a short period of time, so we have got time to get on top of this, but unfortunately it does mean a quarantine period for a number of South Australians. So I have got some exposure sites I'll just go through and just give you the tiers for those exposure sites. So the first is, I've just mentioned the Quest on King William South, which is the reception area only. And we'll be putting that on our public website, because it is possible that members of the public were there at that time, and that was from 6:15 to 7 p.m. last night, so Sunday the 10th of October. And then the other Tier 1 site will be the whole of the Jetstar flight, including passengers and crew. Now, of course, people coming from Victoria would be required to quarantine, but we will be looking very closely at the quarantine arrangements of anybody that was on that flight. And as I've called out that flight name, and it came in 4 p.m. On Sunday the 10th of October. So the other exposure site, people will not be surprised, is going to be the Adelaide Airport. The information I've got is that this a person had a mask on, went rapidly through the airport and got into a taxi. So at the moment we're calling this a Tier 4 site, which means monitor for symptoms only. And the time is Sunday 5:30 till 6:20 p.m. At the Adelaide Airport. So those are really the details I've got to date. And we're just in the beginning of this outbreak investigation, and there may be further information that we get with CCTV footage, particularly looking at the airport, and of course we'll update people as that pans out. So again, just another reminder to South Australians, this is very close to us having an outbreak here in our state, because we've got Victoria and New South Wales, particularly Victoria, with very high case numbers, lots of community transmission. New South Wales very good with their case numbers today, but as people will have heard the news, a very exciting day for those in Sydney in particular, with now opening up of some of those very tight restrictions. So we'll have to see what happens with their numbers over there, but still very much a risk for us in our state. But what can we do as individuals? So the most important thing you can do as a South Australian is just to get yourself vaccinated. We've got our wonderful mass vaccination clinics, we've got GPs on board. Also, you can get Moderna at your local chemist, so really so many opportunities for vaccination. It's safe, it's effective, and it does take a little bit of time to develop your immune response. So today is the best day to go and get vaccinated and get your booking in, and make sure you go and get those 2 doses before we have more disease in our state. So that's really what I've got to say today. I'm very happy to take any further questions about either of the cases.
How many people were on board that Jetstar flight?
I don't have the full manifest yet, but we'll be chasing that through. And as people will know, when they come into our airport, you're required to QR check-in, which makes it a lot quicker for us to be able to SMS people. So I would have thought that people on that flight will have already been SMS'd, and we'll be following up with anybody that we can't get hold of.
But you would say dozens?
I'm not absolutely sure, actually. I mean, it's possible we'll be able to get that for you later today. I just don't have the number in front of me.
Professor, are you worried about any place in particular in the airport for that broader tier category?
No, if we were concerned about a particular area, we would have put that and we would list that separately. So at the moment it is Tier 4. Just watch out for symptoms. Now, of course, if you were at the airport last night and you're worried, go and get yourself tested. If you were exposed last night, I probably wouldn't go and get tested right now, because you've got to leave it a little while. But certainly if you wake up tomorrow morning and you have any symptoms at all, you need to go and get a COVID test.
Professor, could you just run through the lady's quarantine arrangements? How long was she required to be in quarantine? And why was it the Quest and not one of the other medi-hotels that we've got in the city?
So we have a category in our cross-border direction for essential workers, and those are people that are allowed to come in from an area where there's high rates of disease, and there are various strategies used depending on the particular sector. So there might be people that drive in and they might be in our state to fix up critical infrastructure such as electricity or water or gas, and they may be able to do that work as an essential worker, not have anything to do with the South Australian, wear a mask when they're not working, and then whilst they're not at the job, then they are back in a self-quarantine situation. Now, with the mining sites in South Australia, there's been a variety of things that have been used. In our larger mines, the requirement is, from the miners' point of view, is that they quarantine people before they go up to the mine site. And because it's been a level 4, they have been able to stipulate where they quarantine. Now, we've had, people might recall, we had a miner who stayed at the Atura, and we've now got this woman at the Quest. So we're just working through other options now with Department of Energy and Mining. We had a very constructive meeting with our department representative from Department of Energy and Mining today, because we just have to make sure not only is it safe for the mining community, but it's got to be safe for the South Australian community as well. The other thing to say is if we were able to have a quick turnaround of testing at the airport for these particular people, it would obviously be very advantageous. And in fact, this week it's going to be the start of a trial of rapid antigen testing here at Adelaide Airport for those essential workers. So it is very timely. I'm very pleased because I was going to ring SA Pathology and say, look, what can we do here? And was told that it's actually this week that they'll be trialling that technology, which is great.
What was the outcome of that meeting with the representatives, Professor?
Oh, so that was just our discussion with Department of Energy and Mines, and really just talking through that we've had 2 miners and looking at alternatives to quarantine. The thing is, if we had all of the essential workers coming into our medi-hotel, that would mean that returning South Australians wouldn't be able to use that facility. So we just need to have a look at the different options. And it's not, you've got people that are in the mining industry. Now, obviously, with the way Victoria is at the moment, the mines are very cognizant of that, and so they've tried to reduce any workforce requirements coming from interstate. But some of these things are very specialised, the sort of workforce that you need, and so sometimes we do have to have somebody come in from another state. So we're just looking at all of the arrangements to see what alternatives we can come up with.
Which mine was it?
Look, I'd just rather not say. I think it's important that we do have some you know, try and keep this person's personal details as private as much as possible. But we're very lucky in South Australia. We work with a large number of mines. You know, there's a large number of mines here in our state, and we work with all of them to try and have it safe for the mining industry. And we've got to make sure that can continue, but also safe for us here in South Australia.
We've had a new case sort of daily almost for the past week. It's sort of slowly building up each day. A couple. Are we on the cusp of an outbreak here in South Australia, Professor? Are we close?
Well, I've been saying this for quite a number of weeks, and indeed perhaps months now, because of what's happening in New South Wales and in Victoria. And it's exactly why I've been urging South Australians to get on and get vaccinated. You can see the very high rates of vaccination now in New South Wales and Victoria, and also ACT, above 90% in New South Wales and ACT with their first doses. I would love that to be here, because that would mean to me that all South Australians are getting themselves protected. So I appreciate that it can be difficult for some people to get themselves booked in, and we are trying to make it as available as possible. We're pivoting as we go to make it more flexible, to have more vaccines getting out to people rather than expecting people to book into a vaccine clinic. But it is a really good question, because we will be, as people know, having the disease come through our state, and every person here that is old enough, 12 and up, needs to get themselves protected.
Professor, can I ask, how worried are you about those sites in Renmark and Ceduna from that other truck driver?
Yeah, well, it's quite a while now, and we do our wastewater testing, but I'm really keen to make sure that anybody at those sites has at least had one test, so that we know that we're not dealing with a little mini outbreak starting in one of those rural towns.
So, Professor, given all of this, and you've got your infamous transition committee meeting tomorrow, which we all look forward to every week, what can we expect out of tomorrow's meeting, and what advice will you be giving your colleagues about what levels of restrictions we should be enjoying in the coming week?
So what I could perhaps turn it round and say is, I think as South Australians we are enjoying quite a lot of freedom here. When we look at Victoria and New South Wales, we have minimal restrictions on our ability to enjoy the things that we love doing here in our state. I know that masks people find perhaps a bit problematic, but it does give us that extra protection. So we, you know, I've been dealing with all of the cases as they come through, as you said, on a daily basis. So I think that the risk is very significant here. So I'm not going to go into details about what we're going to be discussing at the Transition Committee. It is very important that we meet on a regular basis, and we are always balancing the economic and the health and the social impact of any of the restrictions here.
Professor, how has it taken so long for us to know that this truckie had a co-driver when we already found out yesterday that he was driving with someone. Has he been truthful to you?
Oh, we knew that he had a co-driver, but it's not necessarily something that we need to make public. If the person's negative, and that was what he'd been, then there hadn't been a need to make any public declaration about that.
And Professor, you talked about issues with QR codes with truck drivers and mask wearing as well. Is there anything more that can be done in that space? You talked this morning on radio about how, you know, we can all focus on what we can each do, but is there a compliance issue here with truck drivers?
Look, you know, I think we all need to think about our own responsibility, and we do try with SAPOL and along with our compliance team to get these messages out to people. South Australians have been a wonderful community to work with. You've been really on board with us. You're kind, you're considerate, you think about other people and you think about your community. And so, you know, rather than me say, I was disappointed, or, you know, make some judgmental remark, I think if we all work together, if we all support each other, get vaccinated, we support each other to get tested if we've got symptoms. If you've got somebody at work who's coughing and spluttering, send them home, get them to have a COVID test, make sure they're over it before they get back to work. Encourage mask wearing and all of those other important aspects of controlling this pandemic. That's how we'll get through it. It's when we start dividing our community and we're not all on the page together, then we start to have problems. So I'm very, very grateful to South Australians keeping on board with this very long journey that the pandemic has been.
Professor, are we going to be able to see friends and family members in Sydney and Melbourne this Christmas? And if so, how would that work?
So we're working through those plans at the moment, but COVID, as you know, has thrown us some curveballs, and I, for one, am very keen to see my daughter, who's in the ACT. So at the moment, we've got different situations happening in Victoria, and we've got a different situation happening in New South Wales. They're at different timings. I think it's going to be really important to see what happens in New South Wales as they open up their community, and I am absolutely hoping with that high vaccination rate that the disease rates continue to trend down. We've made public statements that South Australia is following the national plan. We will like to see some softening of that border as we reach the 80%. I'm very keen if New South Wales and ACT can get higher than 80%, that South Australia will also get higher than that. I'm very confident that we will be able to, but we will have the disease here at some point when those borders are gradually open.
Professor, can you shed some light on some arrivals at the Pullman? Literally, as we speak, I understand that one person there's been two buses, one person has come off one bus and then three people off another. They're all in PPE. Are these close contacts on this plane, or close contacts of, I guess, today's cases?
Look, I don't have that level of detail. You're much more up to date about what's happening at the Pullman. I haven't managed to get over there or get a view of that.
Why would there be people arriving at the Pullman in PPE today?
I can't answer that. You know, we can follow up afterwards, but I don't sit there monitoring what happens at the Pullman.
Professor, were there other minors on this flight with the lady last night?
I don't have that information. All I have is the information that's to hand, is that we've got one person and they're positive that come from Victoria.
Are you happy with the level of testing, Professor, at the moment?
Let's see how it's starting to pick up. Yeah, we had 4,500 tests yesterday. Not too bad for a Sunday. There was certainly an increase when we've had the issue in Mount Gambier. It's better if it's around about 8,000, and it should be reflecting the amount of respiratory infection that's in the community. So, you know, not too bad. Could be better.
Back to the truck driver. Obviously, it was probably significant information that he had a co-passenger, considering they're in such close proximity and driving together for that long. Don't you think it was probably a detail that the public needed to know?
Oh, no, absolutely not. We need to know about it because it's a close contact. So as soon as we knew about the truck and we had the positive and he's got a co-driver, the truck was turned around and they were brought back into Adelaide. The driver was put into Tom's Court. The close contact would have gone into the Pullman. He tests positive, then he goes to Tom's Court. So we get the testing done and then we'll have to make a determination.
And Professor, by Christmas, is it likely that people from Sydney, Melbourne or Canberra will need to quarantine if they're hoping to visit relatives here? Is that the plan?
Look, I think there's different things that we need to look at. I would be hopeful that there will be people that do not need to quarantine. But when I talk about a gradual lifting of the border, we mean it. We mean that it will be a gradual lifting, and we'll be looking at the rates of disease at different parts of the states. What we have said very clearly, and what is in the national plan, is that we wouldn't have whole jurisdictional border controls, and that's what we're very keen to be avoiding in South Australia.
So on this issue of quarantine and Christmas, we've heard different things expressed over the last week. Is it really just too early at this stage to say whether that will be a requirement?
Yeah, and I really don't mean to be sort of fobbing off and not answering the question, but it is too early to say. We've got to see what happens in Victoria. We have to see what's happening in New South Wales, but we are going to be opening the border in such a way that we will be getting some people with the disease here. But what would be difficult to deal with is if we had, you know, a couple of hundred people with the COVID all at the same time, and then we need to then do our contact tracing and quarantining, and we'd need to be putting out all of those spot fires, and it would be a lot of work. So we need to be doing it in a way that we gradually open those borders. And fortunately, that we've been able to have the Doherty Institute help us with some modelling. So that hasn't been completed yet, and once we have that done, and once we see what is happening in New South Wales and Victoria, we will be able to make more definitive comments. But I certainly, as a person that has a relative in the ACT, am looking forward to seeing that person at Christmas.
So did the Premier go too soon in making such a bold declaration that those coming in wouldn't have to quarantine?
Look, I'm not absolutely sure in what context he made those comments, but I do understand that he talked about exposure sites, and so an exposure site could be a venue, but it could indeed be an LGA. It really depends what the disease rates are looking like at that point in time.
Professor, could I just ask you about your comment just then about that it's too early to tell what's going to happen with Christmas. What do you say to people that find that statement hard to believe, that we're nearly 2 months out from Christmas, people are starting to make plans for that, and you're sitting here telling the public that you don't actually know yet what's going to happen with Christmas? What do you say to those types of criticisms?
Let's just get back onto the right page, Andrew. So what I'm saying is it's a little bit too early to tell what the disease rates will be looking like at different parts of New South Wales and Victoria. So I'm very clear that we will be gradually opening the border, and then we will have arrangements for people who are double vaccinated to come into our state, but some of those people may need to be tested, some of those people may need to be doing symptom checks, some of those people may indeed need to be doing quarantine. But it's in terms of actually determining that, we need to see what the rates of the disease are like. Otherwise, you're not going to be following the science. We need to be making the best decisions for us as a state as we allow the disease to come in.
Did this miner, the FIFO worker, did she do everything right? Did she check in?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. No questions asked. Got tested straight away, went straight to her hotel, quarantined, and, you know, unfortunately for her, she's got the test back now.
And do you think you've contacted everyone on that flight as yet, or would you expect more messages to be coming through as you go through?
I would expect that the team's already been able to get an SMS message out, but it's important for us to make phone contact as well, so they'll be working on that at the moment.
And Professor, just to clarify the arrangements with the minor, so she went to the nominated hotel.
Yes.
Was she then required to stay in quarantine until a negative result before she could begin working? What's the exact
Oh, so no, she would have been in quarantine for 14 days and have had testing done during that period of time.
And not allowed to leave at all?
No, that's right. Yeah.
Would you expect a positive case to come out of that, though? And was she sitting next to someone? I mean, what is the likelihood of that?
Well, look, we've seen, unfortunately, last week with the Virgin flight, it's the first time we've seen transmission on a flight for quite some time. Because of the requirement for people to be wearing masks, I think that has really taken the edge off any of the transmission on air flights. And I don't have exact details of whether she took her mask off to have a drink or such like, and I don't know who she was sitting next to. But because Delta is so much more transmissible, we will be, and also because we know that she was quite infectious, we're making that a Tier 1 site.
Terrific.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Did the Minister want to say anything?
Oh, yes, Minister.
Well, what do you think about the Premier's declaration stance on quarantining those coming into the state for Christmas?
SA Health's position and the Marshall Liberal Government's position on this is exactly the same. Once we reach 80% of the double vaccinated population, we will no longer rely on statewide lockdowns and statewide lockouts of other states and territories. The Premier and Professor Spurrier have repeatedly indicated that there still may need to be a quarantining for people at exposure sites and LGAs of high transmission. The position of the government and SA Health is exactly the same.
So you admit he went too early, possibly saying that?
I believe that the Premier's been misquoted.
What do you mean misquoted?
Well, if you look at it, my understanding is that he referenced exposure sites.
So, but do you think there's a balance here, Minister, between, I suppose, the political messaging and then people getting their hopes up for Christmas? Should the government be a little bit more conservative in this area?
I think it's really important for people, the best plans, let me start again. The best plans that people can make for Christmas is to get vaccinated and to make sure that their loved ones interstate are fully vaccinated. It is really important not only that we, as a state, strengthen our capacity to deal with COVID infections as we reopen our borders, but it's also important that those that want to come to South Australia take the opportunity to make sure they're as safe as possible.
Minister, can I just ask, Chris McGowan this morning talked about the worst case scenario may mean 300 extra beds are needed in the health system. Is there capacity currently for those beds to be stood up if needed?
I've been making announcements in recent weeks about our efforts to increase our inpatient capacity. In the last couple of weeks, I've announced 60 inpatient beds, 30 at the repat, 15 at Gawler, another 15 geriatric beds in the community. I indicated at that time that I'll have more announcements to make, and I will have more announcements to make. What I want to make very clear to South Australians is they can be confident that just as we have kept South Australia safe and strong by relying on the public health advice, relying on the science, we will be ready for the opening up as it occurs. We will have the bed capacity we need.
Thank you.